It's impossible. I actually don't use the word balance.
Right.
Because I think it puts too much pressure because we're never going to feel balanced in it all. There's always going to be seasons where you kind of have to lean into motherhood a bit more, or you can breathe a little and do a little bit more of the work. But I'd like to use the word blend and that's
great.
fluid and it changes throughout a stage of motherhood you're in, I guess.
So was there anything that really helped you to rediscover that and make kind of reconcile it, or are you still reconciling?
I'm still, it's an ongoing process, and I call her the woman inside the mother, and we do a lot of work around this. We run retreats for mothers.
Retreats,
yeah.
yes.
I mean, I still like to retain little bits of myself through fashion and just kind of coming home to the things that made me feel good when I was in those early trenches. But as I got older, I think turning 40 for me was really pivotal in my sense of self, and my kids were in school and I was like, well, who am I? Like, who is this woman? I don't use the word mum and I don't define myself by my career. And you say, well, who are you? I was like, I don't even know. So it's this constant searching for who we are. I mean, motherhood is such a transformational portal. You know, you're never going to be the woman you were before.
No.
And you don't want to be.
It's instant too, right? Like there's that moment. You're like, oh, that's not gone.
It's in the past. And it was, it was beautiful to experience. And we draw on those experiences, but you're never going to be that woman because your whole perspective on life has changed. But you're like, well, you know, when your kids get a bit older, well, but who am I?
Right.
You know, I've got more time and space. I've been defined as a mother for all these years. Who am I outside of that? So, you know, I do a lot of spiritual work with Kelly, who is also on the retreat. So it's constantly tapping into the next version of me, who I want to be, how I get there.
It's so cliche, but it is such a quick time. My children are teenagers now. And now I'm looking going, I'm savouring every moment because I don't know at what point they're going to turn around and be like, well, I'm out of here now.
Yeah.
And I don't think they'll do that. And you nurture your children in a certain way that you hope that home is always home.
Yeah.
You know, when you were in the trenches, I used to think, gosh, whoever says this goes fast. I used to think,
I know, right?
This is not going very fast.
What's the saying? The days are long, but the years are short. It's so true, though. It's so cliched, but it's so true. It's just, I look at my son. My son's my height now, and I'm like, and he's in year 8. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Like, it just feels like a blink of the eye. And at the same time, it's been a lifetime, obviously. Yeah.
Right. So you've created a really beautiful community with Not So Mumsy. It's not, you know, I was going to say it's not just a brand. And I don't like using the word just, but it's become many things, hasn't it? Clothing label.
Yes.
You've got a community. You're doing retreats.
Yes.
Like there's lots of facets to that.
Yeah, it's really evolved over time. Building that community in the first place was really based on sharing the vulnerabilities of motherhood. I think the first content that I shared that really resonated was feeling judged in early motherhood. You know, I did extended breastfeeding and co-slept and things like that, and it was like outrageous online if you ever shared anything like that.
Yes, I remember.
Yes, outrageous. And then the Daily Mail would pick up, you know, stories on that breastfeeding mother and you know, in public and all of these things. And then from there, I went through my own fertility struggles with Poppy, my daughter, and it was 2 years journey. I thought I'm going to share it while I'm in it because this is also part of me. It's not just like designer prams and fashion and fusing that with motherhood. I was like, this is what I'm actually going through, and anyone who's gone through that knows how consuming it is, that fertility journey. And so I had miscarriages and ended up going through IVF. So I shared that with my community and it really resonated as well. And then I went through separation and divorce and solo parenting. So all of the vulnerable moments. And sometimes I feel like I want to share more, and sometimes I really want to not share, especially as my kids get a bit older, which is why I'm evolving a little bit more as well right now, because they're universal topics and issues when your kids are young. You know, it's sleeping and those things. But as they get older, it's personalised, and then they go to school, then their friends have social media, and that's kind of where we've been navigating the last few years. My son really doesn't feature much. Actually, he's come back a little bit now. He actually has. He's like, oh, no, can you take a photo of me, Mum? I'm like, what? But he turns around. This is what the teenagers do. They want a photo of just like from the back.
It's cool.
Yes, it's cool. So funny. But so he, you know, from kindergarten till probably year 7, very rarely featured on my socials. So I was trying to share motherhood without exposing them, you know, which has been kind of a fine line. But it's evolved throughout the time, I guess, over 10 years now.
You never know the impact that you're having, but it's at the same time, part of those processes that you were going through and the different things that you were facing, the community was there for you too.
Oh, 100%.
We're pretty lucky in that sense, like when you have these communities and you're like, when you actually need them.
Absolutely. Particularly through the miscarriage and all, you know, and even single motherhood, like amount of conversations I have in my DMs with women. I mean, I've been walking in a cafe or down the street and like a woman I remember came up to me crying. She goes, you don't understand how much you helped me when I was going through my miscarriages. And you just don't, you're talking to a camera and you're writing things out into the abyss. And even though you have probably the same people that chat back to you a lot, you don't actually realise the impact you have on like a wider audience that aren't the people that are chatting in there, and it's really soul-filling purpose.
It's hard too, though. You're right. There is a fine line because you want to share things. You don't want to overshare things. People don't forget either.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say things and they come back and they remind you. Once upon a time when we used to broadcast, we used to, be invited on a television segment, and you'd go on a television segment and you'd have your 2 minutes to talk about something. Nowadays it's right there. We're using it all the time to connect, to promote things. It's a job.
It is.
But it is hard, and I think sometimes maybe, you've grown with your community.
I have.
And evolved with them.
Yeah.
To the outside, that's hard to understand if you've never had that before at the same time. So people are expecting or asking things of you that you maybe just don't want to share, which is fine.
Yeah, and I go through a lot of, especially with the single motherhood journey, because that's really quite personal for my children as well. So there's a lot of boundaries around that, and there are certain aspects of it that I wish that I could talk about more, because I know it would help so many women, but I just can't, because at the end of the day I have to prioritise my children, and like you said, what you put out there is out there forever.
And we're telling them not to put everything out there.
Well, that's right. No social media for you. But here I am.
Like, just be careful, because that's out there forever or something we never had to deal with growing up.
It's true. Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
I grew up in the country too, so it was even like, it's so different, city, country. I mean, they've both got pros and cons, but I feel like that would have been just horrendous. Having that, and they've got to navigate that now, don't they? So I know that you value self-care. I would love to hear of some of the practices that you kind of swear by that are your non-negotiables that really help you to be the best version of yourself, which is cliche, but people love hearing it.
I know, and before I answer that, I have to say the last year has been very tough for me personally. I have felt I used to have space to do these self-care practices more than I do now, but when you become a solo mum and it's just you, and I'm running a business and I'm a mum and I'm solely responsible for the finances and all of the things, that is always the first thing that goes to the side is the self-care. But it's the most important thing.
Is.
Because if you don't fill your cup, you cannot pour from the overflow, and you just become, you're not patient with your children. Like, it just has such a ripple effect with everything. So I do prioritise Pilates for me. It's like my go-to exercise. Gratitude journaling. I used to journal a lot more than I do now, have time, but even just thinking about 3 things I'm grateful for at the end of the day, that perspective shift is really important for me. So I like to, go for little walks, just take 5-minute breathers here and there. I did learn Vedic meditation, and I go in and out of that when needed. Like, I feel so much better when I do it.
And that's okay to go in and out of it. Isn't it funny how we kind of go, I've lost my practice.
Yeah.
It's okay. You draw on things when you need them.
That's
The
exactly
ebbs and flows.
Yeah. So I have this little toolkit, I call it, and I know when I'm going into more of an anxious state, or if I got, okay, well, I'm going to need this. And EFT tapping has been big for me. I learnt that before I was pregnant with Archie, actually. I've taught my kids how to do that as well, just to regulate their emotions. Positive self-talk as well. That's important.
It's very important.
I do a lot of healing with Kelly. Like, we do our sessions as well. That spiritual and that motherhood brings up all of the triggers, right, from your past and your childhood to clear and to do.
It really does. It brings up all of your anxieties that you had when you were a kid too, at those peak times.
Yeah. I did read something the other day that said that your children would trigger you the most at the age where you needed the most love, and it's so true.
I would believe that. I really didn't like primary school. I actually loathed it. I think it was because it was tiny. Like you, I had a tiny primary school. There weren't many girls. There was a lot of tension, a lot of jealousy, and I just didn't like it. When my kids were that same age, that was the hardest. I loved high school. Now they're in high school. I'm like, we've got this. The primary school was a lot of triggers, really triggering. I can totally relate with that.
Yeah, that's true. The 2 peak times where I kind of went through a bit of trauma was when I was 7. I had my sister pass away, and then when I was 12, my grandfather passed away, and Archie and Poppy at those ages now. So I feel double triggered. I feel like that they're demanding a lot. They're needing a lot more care right now, emotional reassurance right now, probably because I did at that age.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm able to give them what I felt like I didn't really get.